شيخ السلام عليكم حياكم الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we are in the 17th night of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among the people who are emancipated from the fire in this blessed night and make the second half of this month blessed and better than the first half. Allahumma ameen wa ba'd. We finished Surah Yusuf in Taraweeh tonight, and we started Surah Al-Ra'd. Surah Yusuf is a story, from really the beginning to the end of the surah. The surah is speaking about the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, also known as Joseph in English and in the Bible. And the story of Yusuf alayhi salam is one of many lessons and many wisdoms that can apply to every one of us. And this is really the first night we're going to reflect on a story in the Quran. And so there are a few things I think we should keep in mind when it comes to the stories of the Quran. One is, don't listen to the stories of Quran for entertainment. The stories of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He didn't bring these stories for it to be just kind of a comfort. For people to have, stories bring a sense of comfort and joy, and it's nice, and it brings a certain pleasure to just share stories. And the nature of the stories of Quran isn't that. It isn't meant to just be stories that we listen to and find pleasure in. Second, when we recite the Quran and stories, we want to really think of the Quran as if the Quran was revealed for us. Personalize the revelation of the Quran. This Quran is speaking to me and addressing my life and my thoughts, my problems, my challenges. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving me the guidance I need to succeed in my life according to His command and His pleasure subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is how we really need to receive the Quran. Even when we recite any verse of the Quran, every believer should listen to the Quran as if these verses are talking to me. They're not talking to somebody else, they're talking to me. And so the question is, how much of it do I understand, and how much of this can I apply to my life? And so, inshallah, we'll reflect on the story of Yusuf, and inshallah try to find some guidance in it in which we can apply to our own lives. And so the story of Yusuf, just a quick summary, we can't really go through the whole story. The beginning of it, Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, he's born to a family of prophethood. His father is a prophet Jacob, Yaqub. His grandfather is a prophet Isaac, Ishaq, and his great-grandfather is a prophet Ibrahim. So he's born in this family of prophethood. He's born with 11 siblings. So there are a total of 12. And he has one other sibling who shares the same mother with him. His 10 other siblings only share the same father. So they're half siblings. And so he's born into this family of prophethood and guidance. And he was a very wise boy. At a young age, he was the youngest of them, or the second to youngest, but he was very, very wise and very gifted. And so he had a special relationship with his father that his brothers eventually became envious of. They were older and they felt more entitled to respect and to the attention of their father. And so they eventually their envy had reached a point where they wanted to get rid of Yusuf. And so they made a plot to get rid of Yusuf alayhi salam. They eventually cast him into a well, and a man found him, a merchant, and he sold him as a slave. And so Yusuf alayhi salam, and now as a young boy, he's in the market of Egypt, being sold as a slave. He's coming from the sacred land of Palestine, and now he's brought to Egypt, and he's being sold as a slave in the market of Egypt. And so he's sold as a slave. He's purchased for a few dirham. وَشَرَوْهُ بِثَمَنٍ بَخْسٍ. Allah describes it that he was sold for a very cheap price. Although even in the position of slave, being sold as a slave, as degrading as that is, he was even viewed worth less than the average slave. So he reached a level so low in human society where he was kind of like, nearly worthless. Like he was really worth just a few pennies, and that was all he was sold for. And so he was sold as a slave. Interestingly, the person that purchases him is the minister of Egypt, Azizul Misr. And so he purchases Yusuf alayhi salam to serve in his home. So Yusuf alayhi salam, he grows up in the home of this minister. He grows up to be a very handsome man, very, very beautiful. In the hadith it says that Yusuf alayhi salam was given half of beauty. And so he's this extremely handsome man, extremely handsome young man. And so eventually the wife of the minister tries to seduce him. And so she tries to seduce him, and Yusuf alayhi salam is steadfast. He resists this temptation. And it's a temptation in many ways. First of all, he's a young man. And so for him to refuse zina and fornication as a young man is of the greatest of fitan, right? And it's of the greatest of challenges. And so Yusuf alayhi salam, as a young man, as this handsome and attractive man, in a position where he wouldn't be caught, it would be secret, nobody would know. And then second, it's his master that's trying to do this. And so there's also this fear of power. So he's resisting his own temptation and urge. And second, there's this powerful woman who is his master and who's also the wife of the minister of Egypt. And so she tries to seduce him. Yusuf alayhi salam is steadfast and he refuses. Eventually he ends up going to prison. He makes a dua to Allah. She threatens him, if you don't do what I tell you, you will go to prison. He says, Rabbi sijnu ahabbu ilayhi. He says, my Lord, prison is more beloved to me than what they're calling me to. And so his soul was so pure, his heart was so pure, that he looked at matters with the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a gift. Allah gives you nur. Allah gives people light. Some people, they see matters according to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their will is in line with the will of Allah. Other people, their will is contrary to the will of Allah, but they're struggling. They're making mujahada. And others are simply servants of their desires. So 3 categories of people, right? These people are there. There's the 3 souls we know in the Quran. One is the soul that has completely submitted to itself. It just follows its whims and desires. We call this soul the lower soul or the lower self. This is a person who simply lives for the satisfaction of his or her desire. The second group of people, they're people that have struggles. They have these urges, these fantasies, these desires, but they want to worship God in the way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're always in a battle against themselves. They're constantly struggling against themselves. The third group of people are people who have purified their hearts so much that their will is completely in line with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was the status of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam and all of the Anbiya. Their will was in line with the will of Allah. There wasn't this desire to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever human urges remained, it was always whatever human urges were there, it was fulfilled with the command of Allah, never pursued in any way that is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah make us among such people. And so he refuses. What happens next? Yusuf alayhi salam is put in prison. And he's put in prison for many years, over a decade. He becomes a significantly, a fairly older man now, maybe in his 30s. And now he encounters 2 men in prison. He interprets their dream. He tells one of them, when you see the king, tell him of my case. And so the king eventually calls Yusuf alayhi salam. And he exonerates Yusuf alayhi salam from this crime. And the woman, the wife of the minister, is exposed for her crime. And she repents to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the king makes him the minister, the financial minister of Egypt. He told him he wanted him to be an advisor. Yusuf alayhi salam said, no, make me your financial minister. So then the king said, okay, you will be the financial minister. And so he becomes the financial minister. And then a time comes of extreme famine. What happens? His brothers come from their village seeking assistance from the government. And so Yusuf alayhi salam, he encounters his brothers. He recognizes them, but they don't recognize him because they have not seen him since he was a kid, right? So he's right now a man who's much older, who's changed, who has facial hair, much different person, physically grown, taller, bigger, whole new person. So they don't know who he is. His brothers were significantly older when he left them, so he was able to identify them. So he makes a plot. He tells them, he gives them there is some assistance and supplies, and then he tells them, bring your youngest brother, which is Binyamin. So Yusuf alayhi salam commands them to bring Binyamin. They go to their father. They eventually persuade their father to let Binyamin join him. And so he comes, Yusuf alayhi salam makes a plot and puts an item that belongs to the king in the bag of his brother, his younger brother Benjamin. So when the brother is, and then the security guards of the palace, they say something was stolen from the king. And then they say, your group is, the first suspects. You guys were in the location of where that item was. They said, we didn't take it. They said, and they eventually searched their bags and they find it in the bag of Benjamin. So, and then Yusuf alayhi salam said, we're going to hold him and put him in prison for this crime. Their brothers plead, Yusuf alayhi salam refuses. So they return back to their father. And they tell him what happened. The father, Yaqub alayhi salam, he tells them, search, go back. And so they go to Yusuf alayhi salam a second time or a third time now. And then he tells them, do you know who I am? And do you know what you have done to Yusuf and his brother before? They say, are you Yusuf? He says, yes, I'm Yusuf. And this is my brother. Allah has favored us. Allah has favored us. And then he says, إِنَّهُ مَنْ يَتَّقِي وَيَصْبِرْ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Whoever is God-fearing and patient, Allah will not lose their reward. Allah will not forsake their reward. And so, he commands them to bring his father and mother to Egypt. And so his father and mother are brought, and they all prostrate to him out of love and out of respect for him, alayhi salam. And then he says, he forgives his brother. He tells his brother that the shaitan caused a quarrel between me and my brothers. He forgives all of them. And he tells them, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. There's no blame on you today. Can you imagine, right? Like these are siblings who've destroyed your childhood and your young adulthood, who've taken your whole kind of upbringing away from you, have put you in a place of humiliation. You end up in prison for over a decade. You're working as a slave. All this you're going through. He says there's no blame on you today. May Allah forgive you. And then he says, يَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ هُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. May Allah forgive you. He is the most merciful. He even says that when he says that the shaitan created an animosity between him and his brothers, he doesn't say that they oppressed me. Even the language of Yusuf alayhi salam is very beautiful. He doesn't accuse them, although they're clearly guilty. And if he did, he has every right to do so. He could say, you're wrong, you guys did this, and how do you nothing. He says, shaitan created an animosity between us. He created some disunity between us. May Allah forgive you. Right. And then Yusuf alayhi salam, he makes dua to Allah, oh Allah, you have given me power and you have taught me interpretation of dreams. You are the creator of the heavens and earth. Take my life as a Muslim and resurrect me with the righteous. And so Yusuf alayhi salam makes this dua. A lot of the scholars said that Yusuf had reached a point in his life where he felt that there was nothing to live for in this world and that he wanted to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he asked for this dua for Allah to grant him life and to grant him a death in which he would return back to Allah as a Muslim and in the company of the righteous. What are some lessons? There are so many lessons all of us can take, and it will apply to every single one of us. If we talk about family, if we talk about the aspect in regards to family, there is no perfect family in the world. right? We all, of course, people have appearances. Families hide their disputes and their quarrels and their disagreements, but there is no perfect family in the world, right? There's such a thing that perfection does not exist in the world, right? If you ever think a human being has a perfect life, then, they're just doing a great job hiding their problems, right? There's no such thing as a perfect life in this dunya. This dunya is a test, and every human being has a different way of thinking. So what is obviously wrong to you might be right to the other person. Another person might be selfish while another person is selfless. Another person might have a bad temper, so on and so forth. People have favoritism. A lot of things can go wrong in a family. And so Yusuf alayhi salam, he shows us that this world is not worth fighting over. And this world is not worth breaking your family apart over. And so if you have to be patient, be patient. And his story is an example of the outcome for those who are patient and humble. إِنَّهُ مَنْ يَتَّقِي وَيَصْبِرْ. He says, if you are God-fearing, you are in the remembrance of Allah, and you remind yourself to be patient for the sake of Allah. You keep reviving that sincerity. And you're patient for the sake of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not forsake you. He will not forsake you. But the difference is, are you patient because you have whatever for your own self-interest or for any other worldly reason, or are you patient for Allah? Sincerity is the most powerful quality in a deed. Because a lot of us tolerate other people, but many of us don't tolerate other people for Allah. We tolerate other people because we're just family, or we have to deal with them, or because whatever the situation might be, there's a common interest. But our ultimate goal is not, I'm being patient for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm asking Allah to grant me patience. So sincerity is the most important quality. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in a hadith, Niyatul mu'min ablahu min amali. The intention of a believer reaches further with Allah than his deed. A person can pray the greatest salah and give a bunch of wealth, and his heart is empty of sincerity. And a person can do the littlest of deeds, but he is the most sincere of people. That sincerity goes a lot further in the sight of Allah than the abundant quantity of deeds. And so reviving sincerity, that is why sincerity is of the most important deed. So the Salaf said, there is no deed more difficult to perform than being sincere. But if a person is sincere, and Allah grants them this sincerity, that they're always remembering Allah. Allah is their goal. They see with the nur of Allah, Allah will put success in their deeds no matter how long it takes. So what happens? Yusuf alayhi salam, he demonstrates that he was always patient for Allah's sake. When he was seduced, when he was sold as a slave, when he was oppressed, he was always seeking the reward of Allah. And one of the most important things that shows sincerity is you raise your hand to Allah. When you're doing something for Allah, you're always going to speak to Him, expressing yourself to Him, expressing your struggles, expressing your weakness, seeking His assistance, because you're seeking Him. But when you're not seeking Him, you're never speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So dua it has many benefits. One of the most important benefits of dua is that it strengthens your sincerity. It gives you a clear goal of why you're doing what you're doing and who you're doing it for. And so that is one of the lessons, is that keep Allah in your focus. Always make it for Allah. Raise your hand to Allah. Don't stop no matter the time. And that's another thing, right? Duration, consistency, steadfastness. Yusuf alayhi salam was steadfast for more than a couple decades at least, right? Since he was a child. So he's not saying, Ya Rabb, it's been a few years, I'm struggling, where's the relief? Or it's been a decade, okay, when am I going to get out of this? He's being patient. If this is the qadr of my Rabbi, I'm patient. Others have had it worse before him. Many prophets were killed. Zakaria and Yahya alayhi salam, father and son prophet, were killed. So they didn't complain, and they're the Anbiya. So Yusuf alayhi salam, he said, if prison is my qadr, alhamdulillah, I'm patient. And so that's another thing. Being patient with the duration of tribulation and not expecting immediate relief. And understand that Allah might test us for wisdoms beyond our knowledge. And then the last thing, inshallah, and there's so much more. I mean, we could speak about this surah for days. We can write books about it, and scholars have written. But the last lesson I'll take is understand the qadr of Allah. have trust in the qadr of Allah. Have trust in Allah with regards to your qadr. If you're ill, if you have a disease, if you're poor, if you have family issues, you have whatever the problem you're having in your life, have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, Wallahu ghalibun ala amrih. Allah is in full control of His affairs. There's nothing happening without the permission of Allah. It's all under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing is happening except by His will and by His command. So have trust in the qadr of Allah, because many calamities are blessings in disguise. And whoever has sincerity and is their trust in Allah and they're patient for the sake of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make their world work towards their benefit. You see, your calamities can be for you or against you. We don't know. All of us, we don't know. Are our problems to our benefit or our problems to our harm? We don't know. But when you're patient and you have sincerity, Allah will convert those calamities to your benefit. And when you lose patience and you lose sincerity, Allah will leave you to figure out your own problems. And so sincerity, again, it comes back to that trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that conviction in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the will of Allah and being always God-fearing and acting in accordance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we do that, all of our calamities will be blessings in disguise. And that's the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ إِنَّ أَمْرَهُ كُلَّهُ لَهُ خَيْرٌ. All the affairs of the believer are good for him. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us by this Quran, to make it a nur and a light and a mercy for us all, and to make it a month in which we are emancipated from the fire. We ask Allah to make all of our affairs good for us and to make all of the end of all of our affairs in our benefit. We ask Allah to make us among those who are close to Him, to select us and make us among His chosen servants. We ask Allah to forgive us, our parents, our teachers, and all of the Muslimin. Allahumma ameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.